8/24/85. It's taken me this long to get it down. 3 whole days. How many hours have I sat with just as things folded open on the table? I can't tell you how many times I cursed the second I spoke up to Auntie while looking down at the lines of this paper. I'm really reaping right now, getting what I earned. I left just a bit of space to jot this down before you get to meat of the story, and this is what you really want to get at. Now that's all finished, I don't think I regret it. If you asked me if I felt lighter right now, if I was alright, I'd have to say no. But I think in a day or two, that foggy bit of my brain will blow away and I'll wake up a bit better. The whole first night, I didn't even try to sleep. I guess in a weird way, I didn't think I'd earned the right to get any. When the sun was shining out the window the next morning, I just glued my eyes to the green screen outside and stayed turned to the wall. If I didn't see the stupid little book, then I didn't have to think about all of it. I kept my door locked. I didn't want anybody in here. Not for food, not for my fix, nothing. I know I don't need anyone seeing me like this, especially not Sherry. I guess I'm killing 2 birds with 1 stone. Huh, Doc? Quitting cold turkey and pouring out my stomach on a page, all for you. Now, I guess it'll be an hour or 2 before you guys come barging in. I've got the sleeping cot shoved into the door handle, tight enough that the key won't unlock shit. I needed space and time, and I bought myself just enough. Oh god, my skin hurts. I feel like I've got a sludge in my veins, and I've just been debating just slitting that big blue line out of my wrist and letting it out. Just for a moment, without the pain, I can almost decide that it would be worth it. Well, we'll see, I guess. It was July 1977. It was a summer. A big, rainy summer. Tons of flooding down with Lower Valley. It was morning, and my brother and I have been talking all week about faking a sick day, passing notes during class, plotting our big scheme during recess. It was really something out of a Bond flick. Diagrams and careful thinking, cutting class, staying home, that was the gist of it. But to 2 boys, anchoring for a short school week, it was really something heavy to plan. Finally, after all week, the clouds had started to come around, and now was the time. Today was the day. I can remember the excitement squeezing my guts and being too uppity to stay in bed. Looking out the window, the sun was beating down on our yard with a big smile of yellow light, and Barry was laying in the doorway of his brick red doghouse. Inside my head, Nick's words kept running around and around. He was the brains of the whole operation. My own human computer. He said to keep your voice down and speak really light, like it hurt to. He told me to fake the sniffles and to just do it after every few seconds, to really seal the deal. He said that if we held our breath with our chest were fit to burst, we'd breathe really heavy and look red enough to pass for a fever. I heard the steps on the stairs and I knew Mom was coming to wake us up and get us ready for school. I'd flown back into bed as quick as I could, pulling up the covers to my neck and praying she had heard me walking around. She came in with the work uniform already on and her hair was done up in a bun. She looked tired and I don't remember a hint of makeup on her face. She looked like an angel in that sunlight, like a museum statue. Before she could see me, I had my eyes shut tight and slacked my jaw to give the best impression of sleep I could. I'd sniffle, let her take notice, and then be quiet for a few seconds before sniffling again. I could hear Nick doing the same. Her footsteps hurried over to our bed. I could feel her looming over our bundle of blankets. She shook us awake and I caught her glance down at her watch. She's gotta be late, and that worked very well in our favor. Between the heavy breathing and puffy cheeks, she didn't let it slip if she knew we're faking. Her soft hand was pressed against our foreheads before she couldn't get a word in. I almost burst with anticipation. I don't remember what he said, but whatever Nick was whispering to her seemed to seal the deal. She huffed and checked her watch again, then bent back down to kiss us both on the forehead. She smiled down at me like I was a puppy, sweetly, with care. She hightailed it downstairs, and I guess it was to call the school. Nick tried to grab me as I leapt up, but probably afraid that I'd tip her off to our little game, but I didn't stop, and pulled my steps after her so she wouldn't hear. I just had to see her do it, you know? I really set my nerves. I didn't need to know we'd gotten away with it all. Sure enough, I watched her from behind the stair rail as she pulled our home phone from the hook and clicked away at the number pad. She did it, apologizing to the nasally voice on her other hand, and the receiver clicked again. This is a hard part, at least one of them. It just comes back cleaner than a lot of the day. She was just so damn pretty, my mom. I swear, she looked at me and smiled. The clock seemed to stop as I stared into her big, knowing eyes. I guess we weren't as slick as we thought, huh? With that, she tucked her pocketbook under her arm and closed the mesh door behind her. I couldn't say anything, nothing at all. I remember standing there for a second, Barry having come back inside and licking my hand. She knew all this time. What a lady, you know? Anyway, we faked that fever till she pulled out of the driveway. And then we kept it up in case she came back around. But her dingy little Volkswagen buggy was long gone, off dumping blue smoke somewhere around the block. We must have played for hours. We'd go outside and sit with Barry, eating some peanut butter sandwiches we'd made, and flipping him over for some belly rubs. There was nothing much around the house, so the food left a lot to be desired. Not to Barry, though. He'd grabbed mine when I was looking and ran into his hideout to wolf it down. After a while of pretending to be wizards fighting off goblins and stuff, we tuckered out a bit, and it had been hours at that point, I think. I know that the sky was mixing weird between blue and orange. Like a big paintbrush was muddying the colors in the sky. We tried to walk him, you know. We knew he would like that, but going out into the woods to sniff around, Barry wasn't too used to the woods, and neither were we. That was the exciting thing about it, Doc. 2 kids are harder to stop than a freight train when they set their minds to do something. So we leashed him up, pulled up our rain boots, Nick unlatched the gate, and I hauled Barry through it. I remember the smell of leaves and dirt got stronger the closer we got to the tree line. I was thick. It was thick and almost intoxicating. We let Barry down and Nick took the leash, and then the big cottonwood trees would swallow us up. I pulled him away for something. See a puddle of a frog, maybe. There were critters on the ground, maybe a little stream cutting through the mud like a knife through butter. It was dirty and brown. There was dragonflies clinging to the grass that grew along it. I guess I'd found something in there, something really worth seeing at the time. If we'd been smart, then maybe Nick would have seen the mudslide in front of him. I think that he heard from some thunder from far off and somehow placed his foot wrong. He went face first into the muck and he let go of the harness. Barry took the opportunity before I could even help Nick up, and we'd got him to his feet. The last noise from Barry was his wet gallop into the woods. Anyway, Barry bolted away from us. Nick noticed first, but he was very observant. Without saying a word, he just raced into the trees after the dog. I followed, but must have tripped 50 times or more. Nick disappeared in those trees, but I was left on the ground, crying over a skinned knee. I hit on the huge tree stump, trying to catch up to them, but it was bleeding right through my jeans. Blood makes me queasy, and I still get chills when I see it. I tried to breathe through it. I limped along, really slowly to see where I saw Nick last, but drilling was thick in this part of the forest. The clouds were rolling in above it, making everything a bit darker. The tears had pulled a frog into my throat, and I screamed for him. His voice came out of here very softly. He urged me to follow, so I did. It sounded so far away. And I remember feeling very strongly that I should call him back to me. Like, wherever he was too far for comfort. We were there. I don't know. We were maybe, I don't know, an hour out into the woods. This itch starting up in my head just told me to back up and head out. But I didn't. I didn't know what a gut feeling was, and looking back on it now, it was more than that. Maybe it's history, pure and simple. He must have gone far, because I remember there being what felt like an hour before I spotted him. The trees broke away eventually. There was after a sea of bushes and brambles, and after that I walked up to him, seeing that bright yellow raincoat slick with condensation and fresh streaks of mud. He had the dog held in his arms against his chest. He was panting heavily. Barry was splattered with dirt and dead leaves, and he looked scared as hell. His big blue eyes were rolling around as if he was trying to spy a way out of here. I think I must have run up to Nick. I remember I wrapped around him so hard that I couldn't break free if I could. I think I must have run up to Nick. I remember I wrapped around him so hard that I thought I'd break a rib. I was just so happy to see him, I even forgot about my knee. He broke me off as I went flying back. I heard my foot hit water and a torrent of cold liquid soaked into my pant leg. I looked back at him, almost about to cry. He was bug-eyed, just staring out over my shoulder like a deer in the headlights, so I turned and looked at a pond that was waiting behind me. It was huge, about the size of a basketball court. The shore line was beaded with huge rocks standing like dominoes in the mud. The water was murky but settled. Nothing moved. No tadpoles or water bugs. Nothing. Rising from the middle, tilted and tall, was a giant finger of a church steeple. No question about it. I know what I saw. At the base where it touched the water were the beginnings of the roof. You could see an island of shingles spreading out from under the water. The paint was molded so bad that you couldn't tell if it had been white or blue. So also green waterlogged wood shone out from the places the paint that had fallen away just before the peak, and there was a window opening. Inside you could see a red-brown chunk of steel rusted into oblivion. It was a bell. Now just growing into the wood like an ice cream melting on a stove. Then a heavy old cross at the top. What a worth decades worth of bird shit. I was speechless. Nick didn't let us single peep, not that either of us wanted to have a chat about it. He stood staring at it forever, but I just let this horrible wave of dread wash over me. It had a vibe around it, like a force field. If I had stepped any closer, I might have puked. It felt demented, wrong in every sense of the word. I was terrified, right to the bone. But at the same time, it was also the coolest thing I'd ever seen. Kids will be kids, I guess. Something so old to someone so young has a deep effect. And for me, there was a definite urge to explore. How could we pass up something like that, you know? We tied up Barry to a tree, so tight that we might have had trouble getting him off. The dog was not patient, freaking out as soon as we walked away. He was barking madly, nearly choking himself on the leash. Again, I remember those big blue puppy eyes flying from tree to tree, searching for a way out of this place. At first, we scoured the line for something long and flat, something to bridge across the water or paddle over to it, but our luck seemed to dry up. I didn't like how fast the sun was dropping over the sky. Bear with me here, Doc. There was this feverish kind of obsession with getting in this old relic. And I weighed the pros and cons in the way a kid does, so I rolled up my pant leg and yanked my boots off. I charged into that water like I had a dinner waiting on the other side. Not even thinking about the broken glass or rusty nails. It wasn't so bad. The water was actually warmer than you'd think. The sun probably cooked it a bit that morning, now that I was wading through a big brown soup. I was careful to reach for the island of shingles and wood, planting my head firmly before lifting myself up. When I turned back to Nick with a smile, he was standing against a tree, about as far from the beach as he could be without losing sight of me. He didn't talk, he just stared at me like I was crazy. He was shaky and the clouds were really rolling in now. I guess I didn't take the hint, something that I haven't learned to do in years after, either. On the side of the wall facing me, a large section of wood had been torn away. It reminded me of pictures you'd seen in a pirate's book, the one where the cannonball rips through the ship's hull like a pen through paper. A black mole sprawled out from the inside, grabbing one of the edges of the hole, swinging limply in the breezes where strips of cobweb strung agape in the curtains. Hollow bug bodies were curled up in them, looking bleached by the sunlight. Busy taking in the whole picture, a rotted piece of wood gave out under my bare feet. I didn't have time to scream, my mouth flew open and the cobwebs stuck to my tongue as I fell through. My arms and legs were swinging blindly for a second before meeting the freezing sludge below. I felt my clothes soak to the touch and stick to my skin like duct tape. I kept my eyes closed in this new water, and shoving my head up to get a nice helping of air. Shivers came first before fear could charge up and take me over. I took in the area, not seeing as well with the slime still coating my eyes. I remember tasting the liquid and spraying it out into the dark like it was sour apple that had been left in a barrel of toxic waste. And I can picture it in my head as clear as day. I could see the wood above and around the seams between each other, boards showing a thin ray of light outside, not enough to kill the shadow mold and mildew coated the walls like cave paintings. And it looked perfectly ancient there in the wood. Focusing back to my situation, I was paddling in a place madly trying for life to keep afloat. I could feel my hands smack against things floating under the surface like wet chunks of cork and paper. When my eyes can clear up, I saw them drifting up into the light before reading the splashing waves into some part of the church. I couldn't read the print on them. The ink was blotched to hell. Save for maybe 1 or 2 words in the old paper. The only words I can remember making out were, "Jesus saves." It was printed on the drenched sheets of Bible paper in the Old English, in big letter. Jesus saves. Jesus saves. Jesus saves. Coming into the light room from the dark corners, I could see a hat. It was wide-brimmed, black, suede. Looked like I'd been stomped on 1,000 times. Colors in it were fading to dark gray. It floated on the water before stopping against a long, thick glass string rising from the water. There was a mass of them, like white cord spun from around corner to corner. They turned and bent and spinning into large holes which led farther into the side of that room. I didn't question these things at the time, seeing that maybe it had been a growth of fungus or thick wires. But they were thick and taut like a bungee cord stretched end to end. I saw some of the papers were glued to them. Swaying limp and foul breeze, my wet splashing sounds echoed back to me, and I thought about the rest of the building under the water and the dark just below me, a whole space down there just hidden in the mud and the water. Where were the pews down there? Maybe crosses and old Bibles in the way a kid would do when scared. I guess I didn't think about there being skeletons too. A smell came from the dark room across from me, and I remembered I had to keep myself from gagging. A dollop of hot bile came up from my throat, and I choked it back to keep breathing. It was rot, like a whole truckload of roadkill. It reminded me of vomit, but had a terrible sweet kind of after smell. It came suddenly, its warmth giving goosebumps. I swear there was a small, almost unbearable buzz sound. It started and wouldn't stop. Constant pulsing in the walls, the wires strung around the spiral before vibrating and singing in one low note. Then I heard a large ripping sound. It was soft, like peeling masking tape on your palm. It was heavier than that, much heavier. Like someone had been down there for so long, it had been sticking to the ground, like bodies were peeling off as if its bed as it stood up. Like something had been down there for so long. It had begun to sticking to the ground, like its body was peeling off of its bed as it stood up. Before I could hear anymore, I was scratching at the wall where I'd come in, tearing at the rotted wood in chunks. I got so many splinters on my nails that I still feel some days like I might have missed some. Then I'd found a grip along the edge of the hole. I grabbed on and pulled myself out with everything I had. I remember collapsing onto the roof outside, but being too exhausted to stop myself from rolling into the pond. I stumbled into the warmer water and half-heartedly padded toward the rocky shore. Nick had already started to run when I'd first stepped foot outside the steeple. Crawling onto the beach, he was nowhere in sight. Barry was faced forward at me like he was waiting for me to get the fuck out of there. He was barking and growling and tearing at the leash with lashing teeth. I broke the branch off of that tree and pulled Barry away, and we went home. I'm sorry. I know this has to be an honest account. I know it needs to be everything. I miss that dog so much. For all those years I thought about what I could have done to save him, but we tied him on too tight. I couldn't lift my fingers in the knot to loosen him. I was too worn and small to break the tree branch. In that moment of absolute fear, all I could do was kiss him on the head a few times and try to catch up to Nick. I thought that maybe there was nothing wrong, that we could come back in a few minutes and get Barry back, but My head was on fire with this horrible feeling, and I can only call it dread. There was something coming, something I could not fight. I tripped so many times and I cried. What seemed like gallons, but the pain of hitting my head or skinning a knee was nothing to leaving little Barry behind. Running was all a blur. I wasn't paying attention. The next thing I can remember, I was coming up on a white picket gate. Nick standing there waiting for me. He was smiling, relieved and laughing. I guess I didn't share his reaction. Thinking about what I had just done, he looked at me strange and then realized that Barry was nowhere to be seen. He stepped toward me and I stood still. He was screaming at me and then I didn't answer. He started to cry too. He shouted, shoved me back, and I fell on my ass, just staring up at him with big puffy red cheeks. Nick said some things that I don't think I'll ever forget. I know in my heart that the kids don't always know what they say, but when Nick told me that he wished that the dog had come home instead of me, I can't believe. I can't help but believe him. Call me dramatic, but I don't expect you to understand anyway. The sun had all but gone now, and we knew that night was coming, and Mom was gonna be home soon. Nick went inside, slamming the door behind him. I didn't move for a while. I stayed there on the ground, just hoping Barry would come running up to me. But he didn't. What did come were the steps. I turned to hear heavy thuds on the leafing ground of the woods. Random, rhythmless steps, and then almost the second I turned to them, they stopped. It wasn't just them either. There were no birds or squirrels, nothing, just the sound of the trees, the branches swaying and creaking. Scared, I didn't get up and start toward the house. It was something in the way the trees sounded, like they were carrying some very heavy weight, bounding tree to tree. Maybe it smelled me in the sunken church. Maybe it smelled my kisses on poor old Barry. But it followed me all the way back to my house. I know now that it was my fault. When my mom opened the door, I was sitting on the stairs, clutching the railing as tight as I could. Nick was in our room, laying on the bed with the covers up to his eyes. He was crying. I heard the jingle of her keys and the crumbling of a paper grocery bag. The familiar smell of her perfume wafted into the house, and the kitchen light switch flicked on. My mother's tennis shoes smacked against the tile floor, and she gave me a relaxed sigh, shutting the door behind her, and I could hear the buzzing. It was in the floors, vibrating the stairs and the walls, and then I could hear the thuds hitting the walls outside like a hollow baseball bat. They started from the crest of our ceilings and traveled rapidly to the first, knocking now against the glass screen doors. My mother gasped when they started. I heard her blood-curdling scream. The glass gave away and the shatters in the kitchen floor. I remember I jumped up and flew down the stairs to see what had happened. I came to the screen door, now windowless. The glass spread around everywhere. The summer night blew in the warm breeze, blowing the curtains back in a dance. I turned, the sweat coming down from my forehead, looking through the kitchen for my mother. Instead of seeing her, I could only hear a disgusting gargle of something wet. The light in the next room was flickering, and I went to see it. I stepped quickly, not thinking about the bravery at all. I just wanted to see my mom. When I came out to the doorway of the living room, I stopped cold. A warm, dark spot grew in my jeans immediately. A thick stream of tears sputtered from my eyes. I remember the urine puddling around my sneakers, and not even thinking to scream, my mom was hanging from the top of the doorway, her legs swaying under her white skirt. I saw the red first. Her blue shirt collar was soaked purple, and the closer the blood got to the white trim, the more red it became. Her mouth was moving, her jaw just quivering without making a sound at all. Her pretty red lipstick shone brightly against her face, which was growing more and more pale. Her hair was still puffy, and under the curls her eyes stared out at me. They were fogged up. One of them was filled with blood pooling in the bottom of the retina. I stared then at the solid black pincers gouging into my mother's neck. They gave way. Two big, furry mandibles above them were four solid black eyes. They looked like molten plastic, blank and empty. It was just its head. Its fat brown body was massive with four giant legs on each side latching to the wall with the super strength. The drywall crumpled where the end of its legs had stabbed inside. It was covered in pouchy brown fur that let some of its black, simply skin show underneath. From its gaping, toothed maw came from that smell from the church. Bile and rotten hot stomach acid. It was splotched with the black mold I had seen in that dark place and smelled like the biggest, meanest, nastiest thing in the world. Before I lost myself, I had shifted from its body and back to the eyes. They were all pointed at me, as if I was calculating how I would taste, or whether or not I'd do something stupid and attack it. A slow, rubbing sound came from its smaller front legs closest to the mouth. They shook and grazed each other over and over again, like when a cat bathed itself. Finally, drained of the ability to move, I fell to my knees and smacked into the floor face first and spilled my stomach onto the ground. The buzzing sound was blocking up my ears and is the last thing I remember hearing. Then I was gone. Police didn't let up on me until the next morning. A neighbor had apparently heard my mom scream and called them over to check us out. They found me pissing myself on the floor out like a light, and then they took me in and they said that they had no idea where Nick was. He wasn't upstairs, he wasn't in the house. They did say that they noticed a large kisser knife had been missing from the knife block, as well as a flashlight from a toolbox. I didn't know what to say, and that they thought about as much. They were small town boys, you know. They didn't have a lead to save their lives, and they sure as shit didn't know what the hell to do with little old me. My mom, they said, that was found off the property. She was dangling from a tree, obviously deceased, but she'd been coated in this fine, strong wire and left there. On top of your report says that she'd been drained, not a drop of fluids left sloshing around in there. I haven't found anything documenting my brother Nick's body at all, but I have a decent idea of where it might be. I'd bet $2 and a week's worth of smack that he's lying in that sunken old place. Probably been there now, 8 years. 8 years, and I still have to remember that it was all my fault. Letter to Head Physician Donald O'Darren from Dr. Wilford Bellenchamp. I understand the board's decision in light of my recent events regarding my care for Mr. Orrin Harley. To the representatives in these seats, I offer my sincerest apologies. I swear to the oath that I was doing what I saw fit for my patient's well-being. It was come to my attention that Mrs. Sherry DeVay had been terminated and is expected to relinquish her set of keys and uniform immediately. I would also offer my apologies, as I am to blame for her misconduct. Make no mistake, it is entirely due to my influence that she did break the established rules. You can find the evidence of the corroborate my story within my patient notes regarding Orrin Harley, including with this formal letter. I would ask you to reconsider her termination and reassign her to the position. As for me, I am as of now signing my resignation from the Winewick Rehabilitation Center. I am happy to see that Mr. Harley has made a speedy recovery at the Winewick Memorial Hospital and is eating better. This will be a strong final note to the end of my tenure as a physician at this institution. I'm sorry that I won't be staying long enough to see his return, despite his distaste for me. I imagine his methadone levels are now in question, seeing as he did withstand a hefty 72-hour withdrawal. It's fortunate that he was able to curb himself, no matter the circumstance. I'm looking forward to see his therapy journals before my departure, as it will better help to translate his situation to his new doctor. Well regards, Dr. Wilford Bellenchamp.